Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're bringing together two things that might seem entirely disconnected at first glance. We've got a 19th century Russian masterpiece on one hand, and our thoroughly modern epidemic of loneliness on the other. We're going to explore how Fyodor Dostoevsky's iconic novel, The Idiot, perfectly diagnoses the creeping isolation we're all feeling today, and how modern thinkers believe we can actually reclaim our sense of community. Get ready, because the parallels here are absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's dive right into this. $400 billion. Now, to put that into perspective, according to market research, that is what the global psychotherapy and mental health services industry was worth recently, and it is projected to grow even more. Now, why start here? Well, because the staggering number points to a massive societal shift. Think about it for a second. Historically, a huge portion of our daily emotional processing happened totally organically. They're friendships, community gatherings, neighborhood bonds. But as those organic connections have steadily declined since the mid-20th century, we've increasingly started paying professionals to fill that exact void. And, it's not just therapy. In 2023, the UK saw a 65% rise in something called co-living spaces. Now, intentional community sounds lovely, right? But what this often translates to in practice is essentially we work for flats. People are literally paying private equity firms and property managers to orchestrate shared kitchens and host dinner parties. The organic neighborhood street party has pretty much been replaced by an amenity fee. Which brings us to a really provocative question. Are we replacing friendship itself with economic transactions? One of our sources describes this specific trend as late-stage social capitalism. It's a critique suggesting that as we become more isolated, instead of fixing the root causes of our loneliness, we simply purchase economic solutions to manage it. We've effectively outsourced our human connection. Now, what's truly fascinating here is that this isn't just some 21st century problem fueled by smartphones or social media. If we pivot back to 1860s Europe, this exact materialist shift was just taking root. The Industrial Revolution was booming, Charles Darwin's theories were completely redefining humanity's place in nature, and traditional spiritual and communal bonds were rapidly being replaced by the competitive pursuit of money and basic survival.
Part 1. Dostoevsky's materialist warning. This is where Fyodor Dostoevsky enters the picture. While living in Western Europe, Dostoevsky watched this transformation happen in real time. He wrote his novel, The Idiot, as a direct response to this shift. For us, it serves as a brilliant historical echo. He was diagnosing the psychological dangers of a society that reduces human beings to transactional values, long before private equity dinner parties were ever a thing.
Consider the words of Lebedev in the novel. He's a sort of buffoon philosopher character, but he delivers this completely apocalyptic warning about what he calls the age of railways. He argues that despite the massive increase in technological progress, wealth, and rapid communication, the binding idea of humanity is lost. His 19th century dread of technological atomization maps perfectly onto our modern feelings of digital isolation. We have more networks than ever before, but ironically, less actual strength. Dostoevsky illustrates this conflict by splitting the world into two main archetypes. On one side, we have the transactional world. This is embodied by characters like Ganya, an aspiring capitalist whose only goal is to acquire enough money to buy social autonomy, and Rogozhin, who represents a terrifying, primitive social Darwinism where human relations are just about predation and possession. On the other side, we have the vulnerable world, which is built on compassion, selflessness, and spiritual unity. And into this brutal transactional world, Dostoevsky drops his hero. Part 2. The perfectly beautiful man. Enter Prince Myshkin. Dostoevsky's ambitious goal with this novel was to portray a positively beautiful man. He wanted to see exactly what would happen if a truly innocent, Christ-like figure, someone possessing absolute goodness and pure compassion, was thrust into the hyper-competitive, deeply corrupt reality of modern high society. We can really think of Prince Myshkin as the ultimate anti-homo economicus. He is the exact opposite of the rational, calculating, self-interested economic man. Myshkin has absolutely zero pride. He doesn't calculate his social standing, he doesn't maneuver for financial advantage, and he speaks to servants with the exact same respect as he does to high-ranking generals. Because he operates completely outside the transactional rules of society, everyone around him essentially views him as, well, an idiot. And this brilliantly illustrates the societal costs of a purely materialist mindset. Extreme competition replaces cooperation, spiritual faith erodes, and human life itself becomes commodified as people submit to a cold natural determinism. There's an incredibly famous, intense scene in the novel where the character Nastasia Filipovna, a woman whose trauma has been continually exploited by wealthy men, throws 100,000 rubles into a roaring fireplace. It's her desperate, mocking rebellion against a society that has quite literally put a price tag on her soul. She would rather watch a literal fortune burn than be bought. The Dostoevsky's critique goes even deeper than economics. It goes all the way down to the laws of physics and biology. The character Ippolit, who is dying of consumption, describes nature not as a beautiful, divine creation, but as a terrifying, unfeeling machine, an engine of the latest design that just blindly consumes life. This directly reflects the 19th century terror of entropy and social Darwinism. It's a worldview where vulnerability is a fatal weakness in a highly mechanized universe. And tragically, this materialist machine wins. That is the bleak climax of The Idiot. Prince Myshkin's pure passive vulnerability and his endless compassion are ultimately just not enough to save the people he loves. He is crushed by the sheer weight of the biological and societal laws of this ruthless world. The novel ends with murder, madness, and Myshkin retreating entirely from society. Dostoevsky essentially admits that in a purely transactional world, passive goodness gets eaten alive. Part 3. Vulnerability as political strength. Now, this explainer doesn't end in despair, I promise. To find a resolution to the problem Dostoevsky diagnosed, we turn to modern philosophical thought, specifically the work of Sturla J. Stolzet. He proposes a political theology of vulnerability. Stolzet argues that we actually don't have to be crushed by our vulnerability like Prince Myshkin was. Instead, we can actively reclaim it as a foundation for genuine community. Let's see how this builds into a totally different framework. We can break this down into two distinct paradigms. In the transactional paradigm, the one Dostoevsky feared and the one driving our modern loneliness, vulnerability is seen as a weakness. It's a problem to be solved or outsourced to professionals, resulting in isolation and precarity. But in the community paradigm, vulnerability isn't a flaw at all. It is the shared human condition. When we acknowledge that we are all precarious, that shared reality actually creates collective strength and true political agency. So how do we actually pull this off? Based on our sources, it requires a conscious pivot. Step 1, recognize our shared human precarity. We have to stop pretending we have it all together. Step 2, stop acting like social capitalists. We need to consciously resist the urge to outsource our need for connection to apps, services, and paid facilitators. And step 3, embrace vulnerability not as something to hide, but as the very root of our agency and connection. Host a messy dinner party. Lean on a neighbor instead of opening an app on your phone. So the crucial point is this. You have a choice in how you navigate this atomized modern world. The forces of social capitalism and materialism are incredibly strong, no doubt about it, but they aren't absolute. Will you continue to outsource your vulnerability, treating your social life as an economic transaction? Or will you take the risk of sharing your unvarnished, authentic self to build a true, resilient community? Think about that the next time you reach for your wallet to solve a problem that might just need a friend. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.